Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to continue with our webinar series. My name is Darren McHugh. I'm with DTC. I'm the VP of Sales and Business Development. Today we're going to do our next webinar series on building a practice, a new practice or location. And we're really honored to have two fantastic companies that are doing this on a day-to-day basis. And really popular and have a successful client list in the Mid-Atlantic region, especially Bank of America and Arminco. So Mohamed, Abdullah from Bank of America will give us some information on the lending side and all the things you need to be aware of. And then Sasha and Mark from Arminco are going to go ahead and take us through the actual construction side and what you need to be aware of as you're going through and building out a space and designing a space. And things of that nature. So just kind of give an idea of sort of what our agenda is. We are going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about our housekeeping items. And then we're going to hear from Mohamed from Bank of America and Arminco on the design and construction view with a Q&A at the end. So we understand that you guys are taking your lunchtime and spending it with us, and we really appreciate it. So we want to make sure we use that time wisely and are also respectful of that time. So there will be a Q&A at the end. If you need to go and jump back into the office, we totally understand. This webinar is being recorded and will be able to be viewed on our YouTube channel where all of our webinars will be located. So we'll continue to send out information so you guys can see and access all that information. So let's go ahead and get started with Bank of America. And I'd like to take a moment and just introduce Mohamed Abdullah from Bank of America. He covers this Mid-Atlantic region. I've known Mohamed for a while now. He's just been a great resource for our clients that we've been able to work with. And I'll let him take over from here. Go ahead, Mohamed.
Thank you, Dan. And thanks, everyone, for joining in during your lunchtime. So to get started, I'd like to give you a little bit of color on Bank of America Practice Solutions. Practice Solutions is a specialty group within the bank that's been around for over 20 years, and we do medical, dental, and veterinary. I happen to manage with our dental group. Nationally, we are the dental leader in financing, and we have about 84 regional managers like myself between the three sectors. We have about 250 associates that are spread out between 3 locations in Columbus, Ohio, and Delaware, and also in Chandler, Arizona. And we have over 40 state and national affinity relationships. So what I want to talk about kind of as we move forward here is we have folks that are looking at certain practices. The first question we get is, how much do I need? How early is too early to start the process with you? And I will tell you, anytime you're looking to start a practice, it's never too early to kind of engage and speak to us and talk a little bit about what you can expect. On average, for a general dentist, we typically like to say that you're looking somewhere in the neighborhood of about $500,000. As a specialist, from a budget perspective, you're probably closer to about $550 as far as what you can get in an approval. One of the things that makes us dental specific, and the fact that we've been doing this for 20 plus years, we try to make this process as easy as possible. And when you're applying for a loan to start a practice, a lot of times you don't need to have a lot of the information in place. And what I mean by that is, we don't require tax returns, we don't require projections, we don't require a business plan, and frankly, we don't require bids for construction and equipment, because we understand that when you're starting out, it's very early in the process and you're kind of piecing things together. Think of it in many ways like purchasing a house. You want to know what you could qualify for, and then back into, okay, what neighborhoods do we want to start looking at, understanding this is kind of what we can get. So when we break down the startup budget, there are a few things that we look at. Whether you're a general or a specialist, the 3 things that are very important in making sure that your practice gets off the ground is equipment, of course, construction, and working capital. And as you see here with this grid, it breaks it out for working capital to cover a lot of your operational costs, initial marketing, fees and staff and things of that sort, whereas the construction budget comes in with the permits, the architect, the cabinetry, and of course you have your equipment. The one thing that I do want to tell you is these numbers are not set in stone. And so things can go up and down depending on your project, depending on how big of a space you go into. I know Mark and Sasha will touch on that a little bit. So those numbers are not numbers to be married to. We understand that those things can move depending on your project. So once you have an idea of kind of how much you think you're going to need, the big part is what should I be looking for in a loan? As a startup practice, this is your first startup, so you're kind of, you want to make sure you do it right, because this is ultimately what's going to generate the revenue and hopefully house you and your family for the next 20 plus years. So the first thing and the most important thing, among other things, is your term. Because remember, when you're starting to practice, it's not just rate. Rate is very important, but it's all about the overall term. For example, if I asked what would be a better program, would it be a 2% rate or a 3% rate? I don't think you have to have your MBA in business to know that 2 is smaller than 3, right? So you would think ideally that the 2% would be the better option. But if the terms don't fit, in other words, if your payment is $5,000, $10,000 a month because it's a shorter term versus say $2,000, $3,000 a month, that could really move the needle on your practice and your plans. Because when you're looking at starting a practice, you have to take a look at the overall expenses that you're going to incur from the build out, the equipment, and then once you open your doors, what your recurrent payment is going to be. So term is very important. You want to make sure that you're getting an approval that fits all your needs. We can get you a very low rate, but if we can't get you enough money to do your construction and to build out the space and to get the appropriate equipment for your operatories, it's not going to make much of a difference. You want to make sure you get into a situation where fees are very limited, if any, because again, you're at the point in your career now where you probably don't have a hulk of a lot to give in fees and otherwise. So leverage your degree and leverage as a dentist the kind of programs that are out there for you. You want to make sure that you are locking in an interest rate. I think yesterday the rates went up about another 1/4 point. And I think that's kind of the trend moving forward in light of what happened. Obviously, this political campaign, among other things. I think people are very very optimistic from a banking perspective that the rates are going to continue to increase. Rates have been low for a long time. So whatever loan you go into, you want to make sure you lock in the rate. Because remember, when you're approved, between the day that you sign the lease to the day you start seeing patients, you technically don't have a loan during that project. You're just making payments to your contractor, to your equipment folks, to your architect, to your attorney. So your loan doesn't actually come into place until you actually start seeing patients. So whatever loan you get into, you want to make sure you have a mechanism there that locks in today's rate, not what rate's going to be in 6 months. You want to look into who's going to service your loan. Will this loan be held with this specific bank, or is it going to be sold off to someone else? That's very important. And take a look at the kind of flexibilities you have with prepayment terms. How flexible is the loan for me to dictate what the final interest rate is going to be? What I mean by that is it's very unlikely as a startup doctor you're going to borrow $500,000 and turn around within the first few years and pay it off in full. So the prepayment is very kind of par for the course or standard in the industry. But what's different is, do I have the flexibility to be able to principally reduce my loan? So if my payment is $2,000, $3,000 a month, if I want to pay $5,000 or $6,000, will that go directly towards my principal, or is there a limitation on how much I can pay? So that flexibility is very essential as your practice continues to grow and your cash flow improves. Payment structure, I think we touched on that a little bit. The collateral requirements when you're starting a practice should be your practice. You're not putting up a house. You're not putting up a certificate of deposit. You're not going to find someone that brands themselves as a dental-specific lender that's going to require anything more than your practice, because they're banking on your potential. And the success rates are very high, and that's why you have folks like us that lend very aggressively in the space. Project management. that's probably not the first thing you think of when you're acquiring a loan for starting a practice. What I can tell you, and I think Mark and Sasha can speak to this, it's very important to make sure that your project is being managed and payments are going to the appropriate people timely. Because the last thing you want to do is to have anything delayed, whether it's the construction or the equipment, because one little delay in that regard could really skew things on your construction and equipment. So make sure you have a system in place that can disperse payments timely so the vendors can continue to do their work and meet the deadlines. And those are probably the key things. I think hard and soft cost restrictions, those terms occasionally you may see. Those are when banks typically limit you on how much you can pay towards equipment construction versus working capital and market. And that's very, very important because banks typically want to lend to something tangible. They want to be able to touch it, feel it. So in the event of default, they want to be able to recoup that. But when you have a dental-specific lender that's lending aggressively to your cause, that's not necessarily important. They're banking on what's going to happen and your projections as opposed to what the assets are worth moving forward. So I know I went through that a little bit quickly, but those are all very key points that you should be thinking about. As we move on to the next slide, I think when you're starting to practice, there's so many different things at play, and so many people are tugging at you from different directions. I kind of had a little image here to add a little humor, but the reality of the situation is you want to make sure that you have people around you that have worked together, that understand the process, and people that you can confide to that you don't have to worry about. You know, if I'm speaking to my attorney about the lease, I need to make sure the lease terms are going to be acceptable to my bank, who then needs to be, those things need to be cleared by my accountant. So what you'll notice in the next slide, when we talk about the circle of trust, it's really important to make sure that you're putting the team together and you're assembling the right team so they can look out for your best interest. I mean, everyone has a niche, whether you're construction, whether you're the bank, whether you're the equipment company. Those things are all very important to make sure that we're all talking at some level. So when you look at assembling your team, you want someone, obviously your spouse and partner, you want them to be on board, because this is a big decision, right? I mean, you only start a practice once in your career. Your next practice and the third, and those are just going to be additional locations. You're looked at a little bit differently. So it takes a certain amount of confidence and to do that as a startup practice. So you want your spouse to be on board with that. You want your financing source to have an approval for you. There's no fees or obligations to get that approval in place. At no point during the process, at least in the elementary stages, will you be asked to give that kind of commitment, because it all ties into what your timetable is, which ties into the next person on the list, which is your space finder. I call them space finders, realtors. There are dental-specific realtors out in the field today that will work to help you find space. And I'm a big component of it. If you can have people working for you early in the process without having to pay, that's always a big plus. And when it comes to the funding sources, the bank and the realtor, you're able to discuss kind of what your plans are, what your timetable is, what areas you'd like. And it's their job to present you with options to make sure it kind of fits what you're looking for. Equipment company, architect, contractor, you can fall in love with a very good space. But if it doesn't fit what your vision is for the practice, that's not going to help you, and you don't want to find that out after you sign a 10-year lease. These are long leases that are being signed, so you got to make sure that you're talking to the Mark and the Sashas of the world about these kinds of things, because if you go into a space and they can't implement your vision, unfortunately you're going to have to make those adjustments after the fact, and that's going to be very timely and costly, so you want to get in front of a lot of that. Your attorney and accountant, I mean, that goes without saying. I think earlier on they understand that if you're a startup doctor, that there's really not a lot there that can be done other than just kind of setting up your entity and making sure they help you with projections. As an existing doctor, opening up an additional office, there's a little bit more work to be done there. So you want to make sure you have those folks on your page that can kind of walk through a lot of that stuff for you. Financial advisors from the insurance perspective, when you get into loans of $500,000 plus, there are going to be requirements about your life insurance policy. There's going to be requirements to make sure that you have disability insurance. So those are all things that, I mean, they do a heck of a job getting involved early with residency programs and things where they do speak. So a lot of folks that we speak to do have at least some names of people that they've spoken to, but you know, it's important to get connected with them early and make sure that those things are in place. And then the last part of it is just making sure you have some sort of mentor or advisor, someone you can confide in, someone you can speak to that has been through the process. I think the biggest thing that I'll tell you is that when we do a startup loan and we have our follow-up calls with some of these newer doctors or even existing doctors that are opening up additional locations, the feedback that we get is never, very rarely is it about the program or the rate or the terms as much as it is, wow, I didn't know how much we had to do as the owner, not the clinical person in charge. I didn't realize from a marketing perspective how much needs to be done. I didn't realize when I go through permits and have the design what needs to happen. So these folks, as you're assembling your team, are all very important people that you're going to want to talk to as early as you can, even if your project is 5-6 months down the line, because they can start putting the pieces together for you so you're more informed, not just from the banking perspective, but from the construction and equipment side, and you can have meaningful conversations with folks in the process. So I thank you. That's my portion of it, and I welcome any question and answers there towards that.
Great, and Mohamed, thanks for sharing all that. I mean, that is all just great factual information, and really leads into our next guest speaker with Arminco, with Sasha and Mark. And you know, Mohamed talks about finding that circle of trust and assembling your team. And if you're moving down this road, one of the things that I've seen, I've been in this business for 11 years now, when you're building on a practice, is making sure you're choosing a general contractor that is dental specific. The horror stories that we have seen have been when doctors or practices have decided to go with just a sort of general contractor. They're just not going to understand everything that is required on the dental side with the plumbing, the electric, and the cabinetry spacing, all those sorts of things. So I'll turn it over to Mark and Sasha, and they can kind of give us an idea here more about what to look for, and we'll go from there.
Hey, Darren, I appreciate that. So my name is Sasha. I'm going to be starting the presentation as I'm the Senior Consultant of Architecture. I have Mark with me, as you guys heard. He's our Senior Consultant of Construction. So we're kind of going to be switching back and forth depending on what we're talking about. But I'll go ahead and start us off, if you don't mind, Darren. So one of the first questions we always get, and there's a lot of confusion. We do a lot of shows because we're a national architecture firm. We get a chance to talk to dentists and orthodontists from California up to Virginia. One of the first questions is, do I need an architect? When do I need an architect? And what is a design build? Because there's some confusion with contractors being architects and not architects. And what we're going to try to do is try to break it down, within our time frame. So there's two methods. There's actually hiring an architect, someone like me or from my company, who has a degree, who went to school for 5 years, 6 years, got the necessary license to actually put together a set of plans to get a permit from the county. That route requires you to, before you've even met a contractor, you still got to go through the initial steps. You're still going to need to talk to your banker. You're still going to need to find the space. But once you've done these things, once you've got a budget in mind, that's when you bring in an architect. And the architect will check out spaces with you, will give you their opinion of spaces, and will put together a full set of plans with plumbing, electrical, mechanical, everything necessary to actually build out the space. A general contractor can do something similar, which we'll get into, but what I want to just clarify is when you hire an architect, that architect is not a builder. He's going to put all the plans together. It's going to take him at least 1.5 to 2 months to assemble all the plans. But before you can even have any bids from any contractors, you're going to have to wait at least the first month and a half, even before the drawings are finished, to even have something to send to the contractors. What it does for you is it allows you to get an apples-to-apples bid from, let's say, 2 to 3 contractors. One good point Darren mentioned, and actually Mohamed mentioned as well, is you want to try to stick with dental contractors. And there are multiple dental contractors. Being a national architecture firm, I've met most of the big ones around the United States. But without an architectural set of drawings, it's very difficult to know what contractor A is giving you, what contractor B is giving you, and what contractor C is giving you, especially if they're not dental contractors. If they're not dental contractors, I usually don't even accept them as one of the people bidding on the project that I'm drawing out for the dentist. Once the drawings are complete after 2 months, then you may receive bids, then they can go to the county, and the county itself is going to at least take 5 to 6 weeks to pump out permits. And the idea is within those 5 to 6 weeks, you'll have selected your contractor who will be the person that builds out the project that you'll have permits for in 5 to 6 weeks. That architect will also stay with you all the way to the end of the project. They act as your project manager. They'll oversee the, if they're a good architect, they'll oversee the contractor. They'll make sure that the plans are being followed to a T. The other approach, which is very common in this area and in a lot of major cities, is the design-build approach. If you're a dentist who's lucky enough to benefit from an actual design-build dental contractor in your area, you have the option of kind of doing everything at once. What this means is when you're getting bids, within your construction bid will also be the architecture, design, and MEP engineering bid. The downside, obviously, to that is you're kind of committing one person to everything. And it's a lot of trust. You got to put a lot of trust into this company. You got to have, hopefully have done your research on this company. This company's got some feedback in the dental community. You know people have built with them. Just make sure you do your research, because that person who's doing your construction also does the drawing. So they have a big amount of control in your project. This can benefit doctors as well, though, because one, it'll cut down your timeline significantly. I mean, it'll cut down the drawing and permit process by probably a month, which for a lot of doctors is very important, especially if they're on a limited lease, limited 3-month lease. But the idea is you meet a contractor, he gives you a budget based on a site. So Mohamed called them, I don't know, site visitors or site finders, basically realtors. They will find a couple of spaces for you. The contractor will go out there, do a building study, and he will price it out based on what he thinks and a preliminary floor plan his architect does. What a preliminary floor plan is just a sketch of what can fit in the space. You can't build off of it. You can't even price really off of it. You can get an idea of cost because you'll know, okay, 2,000 square feet, I can fit 7 ops. I get a general idea of what that's going to cost me. But until the design is fully completed, you won't know the total cost of your project. So what the design build contract does for you is it gives you a placeholder for you to stay within and the contractor to stay within. But once you start adding design elements down the road, that cost can change, which goes back to what Darren and Mohamed were saying. Costs can change along the way, especially in the design build route. Because once you start doing the design, you might want glass, you might want tiles. One of the craziest things was I had a doctor who wanted a waterfall feature in their waiting room. It just depends on what you guys add along the way. Benefit is it'll definitely be cheaper because you're not going to have to pay an architect 25 to 30 grand. On average, a dentist will spend 2,000 square foot, probably at the very minimum $20,000 in architecture and design fees. Whereas when you go a design build route, because they're doing your construction, your design comes down to 10 to 15. They kind of cover the engineering portion of it for you as a bundle package. So the benefits of design builds are you can save time and a little bit of money. The draws are you won't be able to get an apples-to-apples bid without an architect's full set of drawings. So there's pros and cons of both. It depends on the approach you prefer to take. If there's a contractor you're lucky enough in your area you can feel like you can trust, who's got a relationship in the dental industry, then the design build is probably your best bet. I've got a doctor right now in Texas. If you're in Texas and you're in the middle of nowhere which doesn't have too many options, you might have to go with an architect to oversee a non-dental general contractor. So just depends on where you are. I'm going to let Mark take over for this portion.
Okay, so the next slide is talking about your construction proposal. So this is in reference to a design build project, taking that direction where you hire a contractor to do your drawings, your design, and then your construction. It's hard to know exactly what you're getting because most of these design build proposals are not going to be apples to apples. So what I want to do is just walk through a few of the areas that you really need to kind of focus on if you are going to look at several different contractors during your design build bidding process. Things to consider within the office, within the proposal: your ceiling type, meaning drywall, drop ceiling. What type of are they 2x2 grids, or is it 2x4 grid? What type of ceiling design? What type of ceiling height? All these things can really greatly affect your cost. So one contractor can, provide high-level finishes, and another one can provide low-level, and the pricing is going to look a lot different. Another area that you need to pay close attention to is lighting. What type of lighting is in the office? The quality and the type of doors, whether they're going to have any glass within them, whether they're going to be, 6'8", 7 feet, 8 feet. All these things change pricing a lot. Your flooring is a big area of cost variation, I would say. Whether they're pricing out carpet, LVT flooring, which is very popular, it's a very good option. All those different areas, ceramic tile, anything that's in the restroom that may increase costs or decrease costs. The electrical situation. So on a more core building area, you're talking about whether there's an electrical panel in the space, whether there's HVAC equipment, how many systems that each contractor is including. All these things are done before your drawing, so you really need to pay a lot of attention to these things. Code requirements, is your drinking fountain, your mop sink, all these things are code requirements. You need to make sure they're all included within the framework of each proposal. It's really not the final number that you're looking at. It is everything that's included. So things that even go even further, the timeline. What kind of timeline is your contractor promising you within this proposal? What level of job site management? So your site superintendent, is your site superintendent going to be on site each day, or is the contractor going to put a lockbox on site? There's a lot of cost associated with having an individual on site every day. It's cheaper for a contractor to throw a lockbox, on the handle and just have subs and vendors go in there as they please. You lose a lot of quality. You lose a lot of time. There's a lot of things that can get done that aren't the best situation for your office when that's done. Has each contractor visited the site? If they haven't, how many change orders are going to be in the pipe if you end up going with somebody that hasn't visited the site? And then finally, your level of interior design. That's something that is sometimes overlooked, and the interior design can be something that if you don't put enough stress on early, and you don't have somebody that's really working with you, then you're not going to end up with the office that you really love at the end of the day. And being somebody that's investing $500,000, you really, really deserve that. So those are some of the things as far as the construction proposals that you really need to kind of take a look at being a design build project. So you hear a lot of square foot costs, $100 a square foot, and a lot of times those numbers are not good numbers to go off of, because if it's a 1,000 square foot small space, or it's a 4,000 square foot space, the numbers are going to be much different. So Darren, you can shoot to the next stage, and Sasha's going to run through the timeline.
We both kind of talked timeline, so I'll just keep it brief. A floor plan will usually take, when you first meet with us, we'll check out a space. You're going to ask us to do a floor plan. We have here 1 to 2 weeks because that's the average. We can finish one realistically, if necessary, within 4 to 6 hours. But estimate, keep in mind 2 to 3 days just to give the person time. Your design, MEP, mechanical, engineering, everything, the blood, the guts, the organs of your office usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks, as long as they know what they're doing. If you use like a larger architecture firm, maybe an international one, it might take longer just because they're more corporate. Drawing submittal government body review. This is the actual governing body reviewing the drawings your architect submits. That usually takes we have 4 weeks on there, but it really depends on governing body to governing body. The city of Los Angeles takes me about 8-9 weeks, whereas Loudoun County, Virginia would be 2 to 3 weeks. So it depends on where in the world you are. Construction, most of our contracts are 2.5 to 3.5 months, 60 to 75 business days. Anything over that's got to be a significant construction, usually above 3,500 square feet. So you can estimate about, to keep yourself safe, 70 to 80 business days, not weekends.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing all that, guys. I know again, just like Mohammed explained, sort of the details and the having that circle of trust. You can see the difference when you're working with a contractor who does dental as opposed to a general contractor who has done maybe a dental office here or there. Everything gets very specific when you're building out these practices from the lending, from the building, from the equipment, the IT. All of these things are very specialized. So you just want to make sure, again, you continue to find that circle of trust, and utilize them. Utilize your colleagues, the ones who have already built an office, and ask them what went wrong, what went well, what would you do again, who would you work with. And you're typically going to find the same, usually going to find the same people, same quality vendors work together because they're good quality teams. So before we end this, I want to go ahead and do a little Q&A, and I've got some questions that have already popped up here. And Mohamed, I'm going to go ahead and read these off. Mohamed, the first one's actually for you, and they're not sure if you touched on this already, but how much on average does someone need to open up a practice?
Yeah, I would say it depends. As a specialist, you're probably looking at about 550, and as a general, you're looking at about 500. And I just want to I'll tell you that it's okay not to know early. There are a lot of question marks, and I think one of the biggest challenges that folks really face is they try to wear two different hats too early. So go in with the idea that I'm going to leverage this bank's respective expertise to tell me what this should look like, and then I'm going to compare that to kind of what I'm seeing out in the market. So I would say that's probably the rule of thumb, about $500,000, 550 for a specialist.
Okay. All right. Another question here, Mark and Sasha. This is for you guys. Somebody is wondering, what are the typical architectural fees for a dental design?
Dental design. So I guess that's kind of a loaded question. A dental design. There's a difference between actual dental design and dental architecture. Dental design is just an interior design and interior decorations, your colors, your wall locations, and materials. That's usually, from what I've seen, about $200 a square foot. I've never seen a full dental design take less than 50 hours of man time. So, I mean, we do the quick math. I'd say in this area, average, let's call it 10 to 15,000 just for actual full office design. And sounds like a lot, but all the architect has left after design is just implementing what the designer came up with.
Okay.
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I don't see any follow-ups from that attendee, so I'm assuming it did. Let's go ahead and let's do one other question before we let everybody go ahead and head on back to the practices. What type of space usually incurs the least amount of construction cost? Multi-story, retail, etc.
Again, kind of a loaded question, but I will say retail is genuinely more expensive when it comes to lease as well as construction. Most of the time, because if it's retail, it's going to be ground floor, so it's going to be a lot of saw cutting versus multi-story, where if they're not on the first floor, it's going to be a lot of core drilling, which is significantly cheaper. Also, with multi-stories, they have their own common areas with their own bathrooms, their own mop sinks, electrical panels already prepared, because they know a tenant's going to come in. They know what the basic necessities of a tenant, whereas a retail, you're just in your space, and the only common area is really the sidewalk out front, which you'll still have to pay for as part of your lease core factor, but you really, unless it's a demo, you really don't get anything with retail. Now, that being said, I do want to mention that location is everything, and a retail is going to give you a ton of visibility. Some of the most successful dentists and specialists I've worked for have been in retail locations, especially if you've got like a Harris Teeter or a large shopping center where it's constant foot traffic and you've got this gorgeous waiting room design. People are going to want to know what you are.
Okay. All right. Again, I want to make sure we're respectful of everybody's time. So we'll go ahead and let me give everybody the contact information. It's up here on your screen. I want to take the moment and just thank Mohamed, Sasha, and Mark for taking their time out of their busy schedules to share their information with our contacts. This has been incredibly helpful. Again, this is going to be up on our YouTube channel, which you'll be able to find via our website at dtctoday.com. Feel free, and guys, if I'm overstepping my bounds, just let me know. But if you have any questions directly related to Bank of America or Arminco, you have their email addresses and their contact information there. Guys, is it okay if they contact you directly?
Yeah, completely.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and let everybody get going. And our next webinar is going to be we're going to now be doing all of our webinars on the second Thursday of every month, beginning in January of 2017. And the first quarter is going to focus on finding and maximizing the dollars that are in your practice. So we're going to have a dental consultant come on board. We're going to talk about maximizing all the rooms in your practice and finding some of those dollars that may be hidden in your practice. So again, look on our site. You'll continue to see the MailChimp invitations come out for the next webinars. But the next webinar again is Thursday, the second Thursday of January at 1 o'clock, and we will look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Darren.
You're welcome. Take care, everybody.